Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, let's discuss about Angular concepts in detail. So Angular is a JavaScript framework. It was developed by Google. It has so many good features for the web development. So few of them are two-way data binding, having directives and services and more. So in this video, let's look at each and every feature of Angular in detail. So before we get to the concepts in Angular, let's understand how Angular manipulates the browser DOM, and later on we can further look into the further concepts. So DOM meaning document object model. Any web application that is rendered onto the browser, it will create a tree structure on the browser and it will render onto the browser DOM. So Angular is written in a TypeScript, and when the Angular application is rendered onto the browser, so Angular framework, it will convert this TypeScript into JavaScript and it will render onto the browser, because no browser as of right now, no browser understands and renders TypeScript at this point of time. So all the current modern browsers, they support only JavaScript. So even if you write the TypeScript code, when it is rendered onto the browser, it should be converted to JavaScript and rendered onto the browser. The same thing happens in Angular also. Angular will, when it is rendered, it will convert to JavaScript and it will render onto the browser. So let's discuss about components. So the component is a building block of Angular application. So any Angular application that can have one or more components rendered onto the browser page. For suppose if you see this particular example, there is a login component as well as register component. Overall, it is one single web page, but there are two components, login and register. So to generate a component in Angular, we have to use the schematics, which is of command line command. So ng generate component, and you can give the component name so that it will generate a folder with login, and at the same time under that folder there will be 4 files that are going to be automatically created. So one file is HTML file, TypeScript file, CSS file and spec file. So we can ignore the spec file because in this spec file we are going to write the test cases. So for now we can ignore, and when it comes to the HTML, that's where we are going to write this login string as well as the username text box and password text box and the sign in button. So all these three, that plain HTML content will go into a login.component.html file, and so whatever the action that is performed on this component, which is of a clicking sign in button, so that particular button action will be kept in login component.ts as a function. So it will get hold of the username and password and it will trigger the function which is part of the TypeScript file, and from the TypeScript file we can further go to the service and make the backend API call to login. Okay, so when it comes to the next file is CSS file, login.component.css. So this is specific to a specific component. So whatever the CSS that we are going to add as part of a login.component.css file, it will be applied only to the login.component.html file. So it won't be, it is not a global file. For global file, global CSS, there is one more file at the root folder called style.css file. That is global file and it will apply to any component. But whatever the CSS that we are going to add in the login.component.css, it will be the global CSS is going to be overridden by the CSS that is added in the login component.css file. So that's how it works. And if you see the register component also, it follows the same structure, ng generate component register, and it will generate the register folder on all the 4 files that are related to register component. So in this page there are login component and register component. Okay, so basically components can have a child components, and components can be independent as well. So right now if you see login component and register component, both are independent. There is no relation between these two. So in Angular, we can have a component can have child components at the same time. A component can be completely independent. And one more thing is components can share the data between them, whether it is parent to child, child to parent, or independent component. So all these ways component can share the data. So there are 4 different ways to share the data between the components. So the first one is @input. So basically @input is going to share the data from the parent to the child. So child can get the data from the parent using @input. So for example, if you see the page where we have messages and the message component as well as the details component. So in both of these components, there is one thing that is common, the name of the person, Shiva Kumar, on the right side. At the same time, if you see signed in as Shiva Kumar, so that name is same. So basically any Angular application, whatever the component that you create, it will go under app.component.html. So that will be the parent by default. So in this scenario, if you want to, we can get hold of the name Shiva Kumar and pass that name from the app component to message component as well as details component. So app component, message component and details component can get hold of the name and they can display. Okay, for suppose if you see the example, to pass the value to the app message component. So within the parent component app.component.html file, we need to define the app.message, which is of a message component, and app app hyphen, that particular string is, when you create a component from the command line, it will automatically generated with the app hyphen messages, because it is configured at the angular.json file. So we can even change that value also. Okay, and after app messages, there is a property called name, and within it is enclosed with the brackets, and there is a value called Shiva Kumar. So this particular name property will be it is passed to the message component from the app component. So that means from the parent to the child. So this is how you can pass the data, and we can even pass not just a string value, we can pass integer, string, array of objects, or anything that you can pass. Okay, and within the message.component.ts, which is of child, to get hold of the parent value that is passed, you need to use @input and the same property name, and right side within the single colon, and the right side name, that can be anything you can use, but within the input under single quotes, that name should match with the name that is passed from the parent. Okay, then only it will tie that value to the message component, and once it is passed to the TypeScript file, you can directly use that name in the HTML file with a double curly braces, so that it will be displayed on the page. Okay, at the same time, even if you want to pass this the same name to the details component, again the same process, app details, and you set the name and pass the parameter name, the value, and use the @input and the name, the same process that it will follow. So this is how you can pass the data from the parent component to the child component using input. So the next thing is how we can pass the data from child component to the parent. So in the previous session, we looked at passing the data from parent to child. Now let's look at child to parent. So to send this, so for suppose if you see this particular example on the left side, so there is a message component which is of parent. Within that parent, there are multiple messages from mom, from dad, from friend. Those are the 3 messages that we have. And within this message component, there is a child component called create message component. So create.component.ts. Within that component, there is just one single button. Okay, so right now when we click that create message, okay, that is part of the child component, that is create.component.ts. When we click that button, so in the create.component.ts, we should use @output, okay, and event name which is of create message, that can be anything, and equal to new event emitter, and the type is what type of a value that you are passing. Is it a integer value or a string value, or is it an array of objects? That type, even if you don't know the type, you can directly use any instead of type. And so this is how you can create the event emitter. And when the button is clicked, you can call create message.emit and pass the message, whatever the message that you want to send it to the parent. Okay, this is how you can send the data from the child, but we need to write the code to hold that data that is passed from the child to the parent, right? For that, in the message.component.ts, all we need to do is get hold of that event name, which is of a create message, and we need to use one more function which will hold that data within the message.component.ts file. So for that, we added there is a hold message, and it will get hold of the event, $event. So whatever the data that is passed here from the child, it will be assigned to $event, and from the $event, you can get the message. And if there is a list of messages on the left side, like mom, dad, and friend, that will be, of course, will be a list. So we are pushing that message to the list, so that by default it will be automatically reflected on the page. So this is how you can share the data from the child to the parent. So the next way is using ViewChild. So using the ViewChild, parent can get hold of the child properties and functions. So if the ViewChild should be used in the parent. So for suppose app.component.html is the parent, where we have app messages and the name and other things, right? So to get hold of the child in the parent, we need to use this hashtag with the name of that child that we want to use. So here it is hash with a hashtag with the messages. Okay, in the app.component.ts, we need to use @ViewChild and the ID name, which is of messages, and the right side messages name, that can be anything, and the component name message component. So if you refer this, by default you can get hold of the messages and the child. So once you get hold of the child, you can get hold of whatever the properties or methods that are part of the child that can be accessed in the parent. So this is one way of to getting the child data in the parent. So the last one is using service. So basically the previous three ways of sharing the data that we discussed, there should be a relation like a parent to child or child to parent to get hold of the data. But if there is no relation between two components, so for that type of scenario, you have to go for the service. So service can be injected into any component constructor. So to use the service, we need to inject this into the constructor. Okay, if you see in this app component, within the constructor, we added private service and message service. So this is of a service we injected into the constructor, and once you inject it, you can directly use it by its name, like this dot service dot get messages. So whatever the methods that are part of the service can be directly used, and we can get hold of the data. So the same message service can be injected to any component. Because it is service, it can be injected to any component. So this is one more way of sharing the data between the components. So Angular state management, it is inbuilt feature. So to manage the state, we no need to go out of the framework. So there is something called a service. So to create a service, we need to use a schematic called ng generate service and the service name. So in the previous service where we noticed a service TS file, right? This is how it looks like a class message service, and right now it has empty messages. And from this service only we can make the REST API call. We can directly make the REST API call. That is the standard to get the data. For suppose if we see get message from API method, it is calling the external API and getting the messages, and it is assigning it to the this dot messages. Okay, when the component call the get messages method, then the next one, so it will return this whatever the message that are came from the backend, and it is holded in the service with the field of this dot messages. So this is not accessible anywhere unless and until if you inject this service and call that method, you don't get the data, but it is still held at the service itself until you clear the data. Okay, so there are other ways also to manage the state in Angular, but they are not recommended in production applications. The first one is local storage and second one is session storage. So these two are JavaScript based, and if you can set the data using local storage.set and key comma value. To get it, you can call the local storage.get and you can pass the key, it will get the value. But unfortunately, these two, whatever the data that you are going to set to local storage and session storage, it will be stored in the browser. Okay, it can be accessed in the browser, and even after leave the computer, it will be still held in the browser itself. So this will lead to security issues. So for that reason, better not to use local storage or session storage. Instead, use the service which is provided by Angular framework, and it is safe and it is not accessible for outside the application. Routing is inbuilt in Angular. So to create routes in Angular, there is a default file called app.routing.ts file, which is at the root level of the project. And within this, all we need to do is we need to provide the list of routes with a path as well as the component. So when we navigate to login, so show the login component, display the login component. When we navigate to sign up, display the sign up component. So this is how you can route. So there are two different ways this is how you can define the routes in Angular. And to navigate, there are two different ways. One way to navigate from one route to another route from the HTML file, and even we can navigate from, there will be scenarios where we need to navigate from TypeScript file also, from based on the conditional routing. Okay, if you want to route from HTML file, you need to use router link, and you can pass the path name. Okay, so that when you click this button, since it has a router link, automatically it will navigate to that particular route, and it will render the login component. And the same way for register also. If you want to navigate from the HTML, okay, when you click the register button and when you click the login button. And there is other way from the TypeScript also we can navigate. So for that, there is a slight code change that we need to do. Instead of button directly having the router link, we need to add a click event, and there is a function name called register. So within the TypeScript file, we need to have add this register function. Within this, we can get hold of the router. So which is the router is an inbuilt component of Angular, and that should be injected into the constructor. And after that, we can get hold of the router using this .router.navigate URL, and you can pass the URL. Okay, this is how you can navigate to the different file in Angular. Okay, there are other ways to do. We can even pass the parameters. So after navigate URL, we can give the comma, and within the brackets we can pass the navigated parameters. At the same time, even for the router link also, we can pass the parameters. Next one is lifecycle hooks. So every Angular component goes through specific lifecycle methods. For suppose if you see this page, a login page, so this is a component. So to render this particular component, there are different lifecycle hooks that are going to be called in the process of rendering this component under the browser. So the first one is constructor. So constructor is called first, and when we create this particular component, that's when it is called, and the constructor is the first one that is called. So without constructor, we cannot create the component. Okay, so constructor is the one that will call first, and the second one is ng on init. This is the second one that is going to be called. And if you have a scenario where you want to within the constructor, you can even make the API call, or you can do whatever the logic that you want, but that particular logic shouldn't be used in the HTML file. Okay, whatever is generated out of whatever the logic that you performed in the constructor, whatever the outcome of that logic, if you want to pass that to the UI, which is of HTML, you cannot keep that logic in the constructor. So whatever the logic that you want to just plain logic and keep the data on the TypeScript file itself, that can be added to the constructor. And the second one is ng on init. in this particular file where we can make the API calls and get the data, and these data can be passed to the HTML also. So what are the data that you want to pass to the HTML, that can be added in the ng on init. For suppose if you have a table, you want to display the data records, that can be added in the ng on init, make the API call, get the data and display it on the page. Okay. After view init, the next one. So this is called third after ng on init. And if there is a conditional updating or hiding or showing the content of the page, okay, so that can be added in the after view init, because ng on init, sometimes when we call the ng on init, the component might not be completely rendered under the browser. So for that reason, what are the logic that you want to perform after rendering, so that can be added as part of the after view init. Okay. The next one is ng on changes. Okay. So the on changes is going to be triggered every time there is a change in the input properties of the component. So any sort of change that is added will be called. Okay. If you see in this example, username and password. So when you start typing username, on ng on changes method is going to be called. At the same time, when you start typing password, again it will be called. So any change that is occurred to the properties of the component, by default it will trigger the ng on changes, and within the ng on changes it will get hold of the two parameters, which is of a current value and the previous value. Okay. For suppose on the page load, the current value of the username is going to be empty because there is nothing. Once you start typing, so it will have a current value and the previous value. Current value is going to be whatever is the name that you typed, and the previous value is going to be the empty value. So that's how it will maintain, and it will get hold of the simple message, simple changes object as a parameter for ng on changes. Okay. The next one is ng destroy. So the destroy function is going to be called when the component is destroyed or removed from the DOM. Okay. Even when you hide the DOM, when you hide the component from the DOM also, it will be triggered. So these are the major lifecycle hooks, and there are more hooks that are specific to a child component. And I made a separate individual video on the lifecycle hooks. I'll share that link in the description, and you can refer that. Next one is directives. So this is one of the core component of Angular. So a directive is something which will add some additional feature or additional logic for a plain HTML components. Okay, like button or text box or anything. So it will enhance the HTML components. Okay, it will add some additional features along with the regular HTML content. Okay, so directives can be applied to three different levels: attribute level, structural level, and component level. Okay, so attribute level meaning HTML elements like buttons, span tag, div tag, or any sort of a HTML element that is that comes under attribute level. Okay, for suppose if you see this particular button class where you have a button and a color and a click message and the button, right? The color that you are seeing, that is the directive. Okay, if you see the directive, to create a directive we have to use the schematics called ng generate directive and directive name. Okay, for in this scenario, ng space directive, ng generate directive color. Okay, when you create it, it will generate this file. Okay, app.directive.ts file, and within this file you have a selector called color. That same selector can be used in the HTML files wherever you want to use this directive. So if you see the button line, it has a color, so that's how you can refer. Okay, when this button is rendered onto the browser, since it is tagged with a directive, so within the directive we are getting hold of that element reference, which is a button, and we are setting a color within the highlight method, which is of we are changing the new color. We are changing this color, background color, to different color, that is set in the directive. So for suppose if you define a button with a red color. Okay, if you add the directive and within the directive you can change that color to green or something. Okay, in this type of scenario you can use the directive for HTML attribute. So the next one is you can even apply the directive for structural components as well, which is of a if condition or for loop or switch case or ng model in Angular. Okay, so to use the structural directives, you can use Angular 17 type of thing like @if, and you can add the condition and you can add else also. Okay, this is how you can use the directives for structural components. And the third one is component. So component is a special directive in Angular, and on top of every component you can have @component. Within that it will have a template. Okay, so @component also considered as a special directive in Angular. So this is the information about directive. If you want to have more in detail information about the Angular directives, I made one more video on the directives. So I'll share that link in the description. You can refer that video.